Hell's Angel biker invited his maid on a date as a joke, but she arrived looking like a goddess. And the second she walked in, he knew something was wrong. Very wrong. He thought she was just the quiet girl who cleaned his house. But tonight, she looks like she stepped out of heaven itself, glowing, powerful, and terrified. Then strangers in black suits start hunting her, appearing out of nowhere, moving like shadows that don't belong to this world. And when one of them touches her, he watches something impossible happen. Something no human should ever see. That's when the maid whispers the truth. A truth that could destroy everything he believes about life, faith, and what waits beyond this world. If this biker, who believes in nothing, is the only one who can protect her, then what happens when heaven itself comes to take her back? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of Jax's garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where Lena worked. The gentle swish-swish of her broom created a soothing rhythm that had become familiar to him over the past few months. He leaned against his workbench, absently wiping grease from his hands with an old rag, watching as she methodically swept away the day's debris. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Most people were intimidated by his 6'2" frame, the leather vest bearing his club's patches, and the various scars that marked him as someone who'd seen his share of trouble. But not Lena. She moved through his space with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her reserved demeanor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and she wore simple jeans and a faded blue t-shirt, practical clothes for cleaning. Yet there was an almost otherworldly grace to her movements, even while doing something as mundane as sweeping his garage floor. "You missed a spot," he said, breaking the comfortable silence, his gravelly voice carrying a hint of teasing. Lena paused, her eyes still focused on the floor. A slight smile touched her lips, the kind that made him wonder what she was thinking. "No, I didn't," she replied softly, continuing her steady sweeping. Jax chuckled, running a hand through his dark hair. He'd noticed how she always kept her gaze lowered, speaking only when necessary, her responses unfailingly polite but brief. It was so different from the loud, boisterous energy he was used to with his crew. As she finished up, gathering her cleaning supplies into a worn canvas bag, something impulsive stirred in him. Maybe it was the way the evening light caught her profile, or perhaps it was simple curiosity about the mystery she presented. "Hey, Lena," he called out, surprising himself with the words that followed. "You should let me take you out, sometime." He said it with a casual grin, expecting her to respond like most women did to his rough charm, with a blush, a stammer, or a nervous laugh. Instead, Lena lifted her head and met his gaze directly for the first time that day. Her eyes were an unusual shade that seemed to shift between gray and blue, clear and steady as she looked at him. "Okay," she said simply. "Tomorrow night?" The directness of her response caught him completely off guard. Jax found himself staring, trying to read her expression. Was she calling his bluff? Making fun of him? But her face remained serene, showing nothing but calm acceptance. Yeah?" he managed, feeling strangely wrong-footed. "Tomorrow, sure." She nodded once, picked up her bag, and walked toward the side door. Just before stepping out, she turned slightly, and the smallest smile curved her lips, not teasing or flirtatious, but something genuine that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. After she left, Jax stood in his garage for several long minutes, trying to process what had just happened. He'd been joking, hadn't he? But now he had a date with his cleaning lady, and he wasn't entirely sure how that had happened. The rest of the evening found him pacing the length of his living room, his heavy boots wearing a path in the carpet as he replayed the interaction over and over. The television droned unwatched in the background as he second-guessed himself. Maybe she hadn't understood what he meant. Maybe she thought he was just offering a friendly dinner. Maybe she was too polite to say no. He pulled out his phone for the dozenth time, thumb hovering over her contact information. It would be easy enough to text her, make up some excuse about club business coming up. Save them both from what would probably be an awkward evening. But every time he started to type out a message, he remembered that small, brave smile she'd given him as she left. There had been something in it, something real and unguarded, that made him pause. His thumb moved away from the keyboard again. Jax dropped onto his worn leather couch, phone still in hand. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but sleep felt far away. He was a man used to making quick decisions, whether in business or in fights. Why was this throwing him so off balance? He stared at his phone's screen until it dimmed, then brightened it again with a touch. The cursor blinked in the empty message field, waiting. That smile of hers flashed through his mind once more, and he found himself setting the phone aside without sending anything. Whatever this was, joke, misunderstanding, or something else entirely, he couldn't bring himself to end it before it began. Something about Lena's quiet courage in accepting his casual invitation deserved at least the same courage in return, even if it meant stepping into unknown territory for both of them. The night grew later, and still Jax sat there, his thoughts circling between confusion and curiosity. The steady ticking of the clock marked time as he wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into, and why, despite his uncertainty, he felt an inexplicable pull to see it through. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jax moved through his routine at the auto shop, but his mind kept wandering to the evening ahead. The familiar sounds of wrenches clanking and engines revving did little to settle his nerves. "You're awful quiet today, boss," Rico, one of his mechanics, called out from under a lifted Chevrolet. "Something eating at you?" Jax grunted, focusing on the paperwork in front of him. "Just thinking." Throughout the day, his crew kept shooting him curious glances. They knew something was up. He'd caught more than a few whispered conversations dying down when he walked past. Word traveled fast in their tight-knit community. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jax closed up shop early. He headed home, showered off the day's grease and grime, and stood before his closet feeling oddly uncertain. After some deliberation, he pulled out his newest leather jacket, the one with the fewest scuffs and marks. He ran a hand through his dark hair, attempting to tame it into something presentable. Outside his house, the street was unusually busy. Several of his crew had gathered across the way, pretending to work on their bikes while obviously waiting to see what would happen. Jax shot them a warning look, but they just grinned back, unashamed of their curiosity. The sound of an approaching car drew everyone's attention. A weathered sedan pulled up, and Jax's heart skipped a beat as Lena stepped out. He blinked, then blinked again, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks on him. She was radiant. There was no other word for it. Her usual cleaning clothes had been replaced by a simple pale blue dress that seemed to catch and hold the dying sunlight. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her face, and there was something about her, an otherworldly grace in the way she moved, a gentle luminescence that seemed to emanate from within. Jax stood frozen, barely remembering to breathe. In all his years, he'd never seen anyone quite like her. She appeared almost supernatural in her beauty, but it wasn't just her appearance. There was an aura about her, something he couldn't quite explain but could definitely feel. Across the street, his crew had fallen silent, their casual pretense forgotten as they stared openly. Windows in neighboring houses slid open as curious faces peered out. Even Mrs. Henderson, the nosy widow next door who usually tutted disapprovingly at his biker nonsense, stood speechless on her porch. Lena walked toward him with that same quiet confidence she'd shown yesterday, seemingly unaware of the attention she was drawing. Up close, her eyes held that mysterious, shifting color that had caught him off guard before. "Hello, Jax," she said softly, and her voice seemed to break whatever spell had frozen him in place. "Hey," he managed, suddenly aware of how rough he must look compared to her. "You look different." He winced at his own awkwardness, but Lena just smiled that small, genuine smile of hers. Leading her to his motorcycle, Jax was acutely conscious of every eye on them. His Harley-Davidson gleamed in the sunset, recently polished to a mirror shine. He helped Lena settle behind him, noticing how naturally she positioned herself, as if she'd been riding motorcycles all her life. As they pulled away, he caught glimpses of his crew in his mirrors, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others giving him enthusiastic thumbs up. The rumble of his bike filled the evening air as they headed toward downtown, Lena's presence warm against his back. The restaurant he'd chosen was a small Italian place tucked away from the main streets. He'd discovered it years ago and liked its quiet atmosphere and honest food. The owner, Marco, nodded to him as they entered, eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Lina. Once seated in a corner booth, Jax found himself struggling to maintain his usual easy manner. "So, they make great pasta here," he said, wincing internally at how forced it sounded. "The garlic bread's pretty good, too." But Lena seemed distracted, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that didn't match her serene expression. She studied each corner, each window, each person, as if searching for something specific. "Everything okay?" Jax asked, noticing how her gaze kept returning to the entrance. "Yes," she answered, but there was a slight tension in her voice that hadn't been there before. "It's a lovely place." Trying to lighten the mood, Jax attempted some jokes about his day at the shop, about how his crew had been so obviously spying on them. Lena smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, but that alertness never left her eyes. Their waiter brought bread and took their orders. As they waited for the food, Jax found himself talking more than usual, trying to fill the strange tension that seemed to be building. He told her about how he'd started his business, about the loyalty of his crew, about the satisfaction of fixing things with his hands. The arrival of their meals temporarily halted the conversation. Steam rose from plates of pasta as the waiter set them down with a flourish. But before Jax could pick up his fork, he noticed Lena had gone completely still. Her face had drained of color, making her look almost ghostly in the restaurant's dim lighting. Her eyes, wide and focused on something he couldn't see, held an expression that sent a chill down his spine. "Jax," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. "Something is wrong." The warmth drained from the restaurant as those 3 words left Lena's lips. Jax watched her face, usually so serene, twist with barely contained fear. Before he could ask what she meant, the front door swung open. 3 men entered, their black suits pristine and identical, like they'd stepped out of the same mold. There was something wrong about the way they moved. Too smooth, too coordinated, like predators stalking prey. Their heads turned in perfect unison as they scanned the dining room. The moment their eyes found Lena, Jax felt her hand grab his under the table. Her fingers were ice cold, trembling against his palm. The touch sent an electric current of urgency through him. "We need to leave," she whispered, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Please, Jax, now!" Years of street fights and bar brawls had taught Jax to trust his instincts. Right now, every nerve in his body was screaming danger. He squeezed Lena's hand once and stood slowly, positioning himself between her and the men's line of sight. "Kitchen exit," he muttered, keeping his voice low. "Marco owes me a favor." They moved carefully toward the back of the restaurant, trying to appear casual. Jax caught Marco's eye and gave him a subtle nod. The restaurant owner immediately engaged the three men in animated conversation about their seating preferences, buying precious seconds. The kitchen staff barely glanced at them as they threaded between steaming pots and sizzling grills. Jax pushed open the heavy back door, cool night air rushing in. But before Lena could step through, he heard the kitchen door slam open behind them. The three men had followed, their movements unnaturally fast. One of them reached for Lena, fingers closing around her arm like a steel trap. The sight of this stranger touching her, hurting her, sent white-hot rage through Jax's system. He didn't think, he just acted. His fist connected with the man's jaw in a punch that should have shattered bone. Instead, something impossible happened. The man's form simply dissolved. Where solid flesh and expensive fabric had been, only drifting gray ash remained, swirling in the alley's dim light. Jax stared at his hand, then at the settling ash, his mind refusing to process what he'd just witnessed. Beside him, Lena's breath caught in a small, frightened sound. The remaining two men advanced, their faces expressionless, moving with that same inhuman precision. "Run!" Lena's voice snapped him back to reality. They bolted down the narrow alley, feet pounding against wet pavement. Jax could hear their pursuers behind them, moving with terrifying speed. No footsteps, just a sound like rushing wind. They burst out onto the main street where his motorcycle waited. Jax's hands shook as he jammed the key into the ignition. Lena climbed on behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist with desperate strength. The engine roared to life just as the two men emerged from the alley. Jax gunned it, tires screaming against asphalt. Lena pressed her face against his back, her whole body trembling. He weaved through traffic, taking random turns, watching his mirrors for any sign of pursuit. But the men in black suits had vanished as completely as their companion had dissolved into ash. The familiar sight of his auto shop loomed ahead, its steel shutters drawn for the night. Jax pulled around to the side entrance, fumbling with his keys again, as adrenaline made his fingers clumsy. They hurried inside, and he slammed the door behind them, throwing every lock into place. The garage was dark except for the security lights, casting long shadows between tool racks and workbenches. The air smelled of oil and metal and fear. Lena stood in the center of the space, hugging herself, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. Jax ran a shaking hand through his hair, trying to make sense of what he'd witnessed. The man turning to ash, the impossible speed of the others, the inhuman precision of their movements. None of it fit into his understanding of reality. He turned to Lena, seeing in her face that she had answers he needed. "What were those things?" he demanded, his voice rough with fear and confusion. And there she stood, surrounded by wrenches and oil cans, looking both terrified and terribly guilty, as if she'd brought this danger into his life, which, he was beginning to suspect, she had. The garage's security lights cast long shadows across the concrete floor, their dim glow barely penetrating the corners where old parts and tools created menacing silhouettes. The air felt thick with tension and the lingering scent of motor oil. Jax watched Lena, who stood trembling in the center of the space, her elegant dinner outfit now seeming strangely out of place among the industrial surroundings. "Those men," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're called retrievers. They've been hunting me." Jax leaned against a workbench, his leather jacket creaking. "Hunting you? Why?" Lena wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold herself together. "Because I broke the rules. Because I couldn't just watch anymore." She lifted her eyes to meet his, and in the dim light, they seemed to hold an ancient sadness. I'm not who you think I am, Jax. I'm not even what you think I am." "What does that mean?" Jax's voice came out gruffer than he intended, masking his growing unease. Lena took a deep breath. "I was a messenger, a guardian of sorts. My kind, we watch over humanity, guide them toward compassion and light." Her words came faster now, as if afraid she'd lose her nerve. "We're what humans would call celestial beings, angels, though that word doesn't quite capture it." Jax barked out a laugh, but it died in his throat when he saw her expression. "You're serious?" "I was supposed to only observe, to subtly influence, but there was so much pain, so much suffering." Lena's voice cracked. "A little girl was going to die in a fire. I could have whispered guidance to her rescuers, planted thoughts of the right direction to search. Instead, I appeared to her directly, led her out myself. I broke our most sacred law, direct intervention." Jax ran a hand over his face, trying to process what he was hearing. "Angels? Celestial laws? This is—" He shook his head. "This is crazy talk." "I know how it sounds," Lena said softly. She held out her hands, palms up. "But look." At first nothing happened. Then, like a match being struck underwater, a soft golden light began to glow in her palms. It wasn't like any light Jax had ever seen. It seemed alive somehow, pulsing with warmth and something that made his chest ache with an inexplicable longing. "Holy shit," he breathed, pushing away from the workbench. "This is all that's left of what I was," Lena said, closing her hands and extinguishing the light. "They stripped me of most of my power, cast me down in mortal form. The retrievers are sent to bring back those like me, who've broken the laws. They'll drag me before the celestial court for final judgment." Jax remembered the man turning to ash, the impossible speed of their pursuers. It all started making a terrible kind of sense. "That's what happened back there? That man I hit, he wasn't human?" "No. Retrievers are constructs. Beings created for a single purpose. They can't be reasoned with or stopped. They'll keep coming until they complete their mission." The weight of her words settled over the garage like a heavy blanket. Jax could hear distant traffic, the hum of the security lights, the soft sound of Lena's breathing. Everything seemed suddenly surreal, as if the world he thought he knew had shifted sideways. "You need to leave," Lena said suddenly, taking a step back. "Being near me puts you in danger. The retrievers will go through anyone who stands in their way. They don't care about human life. They only care about their mission." Jax straightened, squaring his shoulders. "I'm not going anywhere." "Jax, please. You don't understand what they're capable of." "No, you don't understand." He cut her off, moving closer. "I've spent my whole life being the guy people avoid on the street. The dangerous one. The one mothers pull their kids away from. But you—" He paused, struggling to find the right words. "You saw something else in me, didn't you? With your angel senses or whatever?" Lena's eyes softened. "I saw your heart, Jax. How fiercely you protect those who can't protect themselves. How much goodness you hide beneath all that armor. Then you know I can't walk away. Not now. Not from this." He reached out, hesitating for just a moment before taking her hand. It felt small and very human in his calloused grip. "Whatever these retriever things are, they'll have to go through me to get to you." "They will try," she whispered. "They'll never stop trying. Good thing I'm pretty hard to stop myself. They don't call me Ironheart for nothing." He attempted a smile, trying to lighten the moment. Lena started to respond, but her words were cut off by a thunderous bang against the garage's metal door. The sound echoed through the space like a gunshot, making tools rattle on their hooks. Lena's hand tightened in his, as another impact shook the entire frame. "They're here," she breathed, terror clear in her voice. The door shuddered again, the metal beginning to buckle inward as if struck by an impossible force. Jax pulled Lena behind him, positioning himself between her and the failing barrier. The security lights flickered ominously as another tremendous blow landed. In that moment, as the door groaned under the assault, Jax realized his life had irrevocably changed. Everything he thought he knew about the world had been turned upside down in a single night. But looking at Lena's frightened face, feeling her trembling hand in his, he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. The garage door shuddered again, metal screaming under the relentless assault. Jax's eyes darted around the dimly lit space, landing on his heavy-duty wrench. He grabbed it, testing its weight in his hand. "Please," Lena begged, her voice tight with fear. "You can't fight them. They're not human. They'll kill you without hesitation." "Got no choice," Jax said grimly, positioning himself between her and the buckling door. "Besides, your boy already turned one to dust. Maybe they're not as tough as they think." A thunderous crash from the side of the garage made them both jump. The emergency exit door flew off its hinges, revealing 3 dark figures silhouetted against the night. They moved with that same unnatural precision Jax had seen at the restaurant, their faces expressionless masks. The first retriever crossed the distance impossibly fast, reaching for Lena. Jax swung the wrench with all his strength, catching the being square in the chest. Instead of bouncing off harmlessly as Lena had feared, the impact actually drove the creature back a step. Its blank face registered something almost like surprise. "That's impossible," Lena whispered behind him. "No mortal should be able to—" She didn't finish as the other 2 retrievers converged. Jax met them with savage determination, his body moving on pure instinct. The wrench connected again and again, each hit landing with bone-jarring force. Where their touches should have broken him, he held firm. Where their strength should have overwhelmed him, he pushed back. One retriever grabbed his throat, but Jax drove the wrench up under its jaw with crushing force. The being's form wavered, then dissolved into drifting smoke that dissipated in the air. The remaining 2 hesitated, another impossible thing, according to Lena's sharp intake of breath. "The bike!" Jax shouted, backing toward his Harley. "Get on!" Lena didn't argue, scrambling onto the motorcycle as Jax kept the retrievers at bay. He swung one last time, creating space, then leaped onto the bike. The engine roared to life, drowning out the inhuman sounds behind them as they burst through the partially open main door. The cool night air whipped past them as Jax gunned it down, empty streets taking sharp turns and back alleys at random. His heart pounded against his ribs, adrenaline making everything crystal clear. Lena's arms were wrapped tight around his waist, her face pressed between his shoulder blades. "They'll track me," she called over the wind. "They can sense what's left of my celestial energy." "Then we'll keep moving," Jax shouted back. "I know a place, somewhere safe. My brothers use it when things get hot." He felt her nod against his back. As they rode through the sleeping city, Jax explained in bursts what little he could. "Got a crew. Iron Wolves MC, their family. Safe house is off-grid. No paper trail." He took another sharp turn. They won't understand everything, but they'll help. Trust goes both ways in the club." "Your loyalty to them is beautiful," Lena said softly, "but involving them puts them all at risk." "They're already at risk just by being near me now," Jax replied. "Better they know why." The sky was beginning to lighten when they finally pulled up to an innocuous-looking house on the outskirts of town. 2 of Jax's brothers were already there, having noticed his emergency signal. They took one look at his grim face and Lena's haunted eyes, and simply nodded, asking no questions as they ushered them inside. As dawn broke properly, Lena sat alone on the back patio, watching the sun rise with an expression of such profound sadness that it made Jax's chest ache. He fixed 2 cups of coffee, knowing she probably didn't need it but feeling helpless to offer anything else. "The more you help me," she said as he approached, "the more heaven will take notice of you. You've already shown impossible strength against the retrievers. That will draw attention." Jax set 1 cup beside her and lowered himself into the other chair. "I'm already in it," he said simply, his voice rough but certain. "You're not facing this alone." The morning light caught in Lena's eyes, making them shine with something that might have been tears. She wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup, but didn't drink, just held it like an anchor to the mortal world she'd chosen. The morning sun filtered through dusty blinds at the safe house, casting warm stripes across the worn kitchen floor. Jax found Lena standing by the window, her hand raised as if trying to catch the light. She turned at his approach, and a small smile brightened her face. "Want to learn how to make breakfast?" he asked, pulling out a cast-iron skillet from beneath the counter. "Nothing fancy, but everyone should know how to cook eggs." Lena's eyes widened with interest. "I've watched humans prepare food many times, but I've never—" She trailed off, moving closer to examine the ingredients he set out. "First rule of cooking," Jax said, cracking an egg into a bowl, "is don't be afraid to mess up. Here, you try." Lena picked up an egg with careful fingers, studying its shape before attempting to crack it. The shell shattered, leaving bits in, the bowl and egg white running down her hand. She looked so startled that Jax couldn't help chuckling. "That's exactly how everyone starts," he assured her, showing her how to tap the egg more gently. Her second attempt went better, and soon she was whisking the eggs while Jax laid strips of bacon in the hot pan. The bacon started to sizzle and pop, making Lena jump. She moved closer, fascinated by the transformation taking place in the pan. "The sound, it's like tiny fireworks," she said with such wonder that Jax felt his heart squeeze. "Wait till you hear this," he said, dropping bread into the ancient toaster. They worked together, Lena pouring beaten eggs into a fresh pan, while Jax guided her hand with the spatula. The kitchen filled with warm breakfast smells and morning light. When the toast popped up, Lena was so startled she nearly dropped the spatula. Her second batch came out black as coal, filling the kitchen with smoke. Instead of being frustrated, she laughed, a clear, joyful sound that made Jax stare. He'd never heard her laugh before. "I believe I require more practice," she said, still smiling as she scraped the burnt toast into the trash. "You should see some of the disasters I made when I first started cooking," Jax replied, sliding perfectly golden brown toast onto their plates alongside the eggs and bacon. They sat at the small kitchen table, and Jax watched as Lena took her first bite. Her eyes closed in appreciation. The textures, the warmth, everything tastes more real when you prepare it yourself. After breakfast, Jax noticed Lena gazing longingly out the window at the street below. An idea formed in his mind. "Want to go for a walk? We'll have to disguise you a bit, but it should be safe enough during daylight." Her face lit up. "Could we? I miss being among them." Jax found her a hooded sweatshirt that was too big, making her look smaller and younger. Dark sunglasses completed the disguise, hiding her distinctive eyes. "Stay close to me," he said, leading her outside. They walked through quiet residential streets, Lena taking everything in with intense focus. At a small neighborhood park, children chased each other around swings and slides, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Lena stopped to watch, her hand unconsciously reaching for Jax's arm. "Their joy is so pure," she whispered. "Look how the little girl shares her toy with the boy who was crying. Such simple kindness." An elderly couple passed them on the sidewalk, walking arm in arm. The woman used a cane but moved confidently, supported by her husband's steady presence. They nodded hello as they passed, and Lena's grip on Jax's arm tightened. 63 years together, she murmured after they'd passed. I can see it in the way they lean toward each other, how their steps match perfectly. Humans love so fiercely. They continued walking, passing a small veterans memorial, where an old soldier in a crisp uniform stood at attention, saluting the American flag. Lena paused, watching the ceremony with quiet respect. "He comes here every day," she said softly, "honoring friends lost long ago. Such loyalty, such dedication to memory." Jax found himself seeing these everyday scenes through new eyes. What had become ordinary to him was transformed by Lena's perspective, making him notice details he'd overlooked before. The way mothers instinctively reached for their children, how strangers smiled at each other in passing, the small courtesies that made up human interaction. As the afternoon wore on, they stopped at a small coffee shop. Lena cradled her cup in both hands, savoring the warmth and aroma. Jax watched her, struck by how natural she looked in this moment, just a young woman enjoying coffee on a peaceful afternoon. But the peace couldn't last. As they prepared to head back, Jax's instincts prickled. Across the street, a man stood too still, too focused in their direction. What caught Jax's attention wasn't the man himself, but his shadow. It moved independently, reaching toward them like smoke while the man remained motionless. "Time to go," Jax said quietly, placing his hand on Lena's lower back. She tensed immediately, sensing the change in his demeanor. They walked quickly but calmly, taking an indirect route back to the safe house. Jax texted his crew using their emergency code as they moved, knowing his brothers would understand the gravity of the situation. Night was falling by the time they made it back, the sky turning deep purple at the edges. Motorcycles lined the street outside the safe house. The Iron Wolves had answered the call. Inside, Jax found his crew gathering weapons and setting up defensive positions. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking ammunition and establishing clear lines of sight. "They're coming," Lena said, her voice heavy with concern as she looked at the gathering bikers. "They'll hurt your friends." "My friends can handle themselves," Jax replied, checking his own weapon. "And they're not just my friends. They're family. We stand together." The Iron Wolves nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. They might not fully understand what they were facing, but their loyalty to Jax was absolute. As darkness settled over the safe house, they took their positions, ready to defend against whatever came for Lena. Through the window, Jax watched shadows lengthen unnaturally across the street. His crew maintained their positions, weapons ready, waiting. Lena stood slightly behind him, her hand resting lightly on his back, not seeking protection, but offering strength. The night wrapped around the safe house like a thick blanket, broken only by the dim glow of scattered security lights. Inside, the Iron Wolves checked their weapons one final time. Baseball bats, heavy chains, and crowbars. Not exactly celestial weapons, but they were what they had. "They're coming," Lena whispered, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the windows. "Please, you don't have to do this. These men shouldn't risk their lives for me." Jax stepped forward, his voice steady and firm. "This isn't just about you anymore. We're human beings. We stand together against anything that threatens our own." The bikers nodded in agreement, though their white-knuckled grips on their weapons betrayed their fear. They had seen one retriever turn to ash earlier. Now they knew what they faced wasn't human, but they stood their ground anyway. The first attack came from the shadows themselves. They writhed and stretched across the yard like living things, reaching toward the house with grasping tendrils. 3 retrievers materialized from the darkness, their suits pristine despite the night air, their movements unnaturally smooth. "Hold the line!" Jax shouted as his crew formed a defensive circle around Lena. The retrievers moved as one, their forms flickering like bad television reception. The first crashed through a window, sending glass spraying across the room. A biker named Buck swung his chain, but it passed right through the creature's shoulder. The retriever's hand shot out, grabbing Buck's throat. "Get down!" Jax lunged forward, tackling both Buck and the retriever. The moment Jax made contact, something strange happened. The retriever's form became more solid, more vulnerable. Buck's chain connected on the second try, and the being burst into ash with a sound like rushing wind. "They can't stay solid near Jax," someone shouted. "Keep him between you and them." More retrievers poured in through doors and windows. The bikers fought with everything they had, chains whistling through the air, bats connecting with increasingly solid forms as they maneuvered to keep Jax nearby. Each time a retriever dissolved into ash, it let out a piercing howl that seemed to vibrate in their bones. Lena wasn't standing idle. Though her celestial powers were dimmed, a faint golden light emanated from her hands. Whenever she touched one of the bikers, their fear seemed to lessen, their strikes becoming more precise and powerful. "Your left, Jax!" she called out, pushing him aside as a shadow tendril snaked toward his ankles. Her touch sent warmth through him, steadying his resolve. The battle moved from room to room, leaving scattered ash and overturned furniture in its wake. The bikers worked together with practiced coordination, calling out warnings and covering each other's blind spots. Despite their fear, they fought like a family, which is exactly what they were. Jax noticed that wherever he moved, the retrievers seemed to struggle maintaining their shadowy form. His presence forced them to become more physical, more vulnerable to human weapons. And when Lena was near him, he felt an unwavering courage that seemed to spread to those around him. "Behind you!" Lena's warning came just as Jax spun, driving his fist into a retriever's face. The being's features cracked like porcelain before it, exploded into ash, its howl echoing through the house. The final retriever, perhaps sensing defeat, tried to retreat into the shadows. But the iron wolves had learned. They herded it toward Jax, whose presence forced it to remain solid. Trapped between human determination and Jax's strange ability to ground it, the retriever dissolved with one last piercing cry. Silence fell over the safe house. The bikers slumped against walls or collapsed into chairs, breathing heavily. Someone flicked on a light, revealing the coating of ash that covered everything like fresh snow. "Everyone alive?" Jax called out, doing a quick head count. There were bruises, cuts, and what would definitely be some interesting stories to tell at the bar, but everyone had survived. Lena moved through the group, her gentle touch easing pain and fatigue wherever she went. When she reached Jax, she didn't just touch his arm. She wrapped her arms around him in a full embrace. "I've existed for centuries," she whispered against his chest. "But I've never felt hope the way I feel it when I'm with you. You make the impossible seem possible." The bikers tactfully found reasons to move to other rooms, leaving Jax and Lena alone. They made their way to the front porch, settling side by side on the steps. The first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky, painting the clouds in soft pinks and purples. "Thank you," Lena said softly, her shoulder pressed against his. "Not just for fighting, but for believing in me, for showing me that humans are worth every sacrifice I made." Jax covered her hand with his, feeling the lingering warmth of her celestial energy. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise on their temporary victory. For now, at least, they were safe. For now, they had each other, and sometimes that was enough. The dawn broke fully over the horizon, washing away the last shadows of night. Inside the house, the Iron Wolves were already starting to clean up, their quiet conversation and occasional laughter drifting out to the porch. They had faced something beyond human understanding and emerged stronger. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the safe house's worn floorboards. Jax sat at the kitchen table, his leather jacket draped over a nearby chair, while Lena perched on the counter, her legs swinging slightly as she spoke. The morning's cleanup had left them exhausted but relieved, though tension still hung in the air like invisible smoke. "We could head north," Jax suggested, spreading out a wrinkled map on the table. "I've got connections in Montana, off-grid places where even celestial beings might have trouble finding us." Lena's eyes held a faraway look. "They'll find us anywhere on Earth. The Retrievers are just the beginning. Think of them as foot soldiers. There's so much more to Heaven's hierarchy than humans know." Jax leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Tell me. The more I understand, the better I can help." She slid down from the counter and joined him at the table, her movements graceful despite her weariness. "In the celestial realm, everything is ordered. There are ranks, purposes, duties, and compassion, while valued, must never interfere with divine law." Her voice grew softer. "That was my crime, you see. I felt too deeply for human suffering." "You're saying they punished you for caring too much?" Jax's face darkened with disbelief. "I was assigned to observe only, to report on human development. But there was this little girl." Lena's eyes grew distant with memory. She was dying of fever. Her mother had already lost 2 children that winter. I couldn't just watch. I touched the girl's forehead, used my energy to heal her. She wrapped her arms around herself. That was my first transgression. There were others. A man about to give up hope, a family trapped in a burning building. "You saved them," Jax said. "How is that wrong?" "Because it disrupted the natural order. Because humans must find their own way, make their own choices. Direct intervention was forbidden." Lena's voice cracked. But how could I not help when I had the power to do so? Before Jax could respond, the world outside the windows began to change. The afternoon light dimmed, as if someone had thrown a switch, plunging them into an unnatural twilight. The air grew thick, heavy with static electricity. Most disturbing of all was the sudden, complete absence of sound. No birds, no distant traffic, not even the hum of the refrigerator. Lena shot to her feet, her face pale with terror. "No," she whispered. "No, please." A figure materialized in the yard, tall, imposing, wrapped in robes that seemed woven from starlight and shadow. His face was beautiful in the way that lightning is beautiful, remote, powerful, dangerous. Light radiated from him, but it wasn't warm like Lena's gentle glow. This light was cold and harsh, like winter sunlight reflecting off steel. "Celestialara," the being spoke, using what must have been Lena's true name. His voice resonated with authority that made the windows vibrate. "Your time of hiding is finished." Jax moved to stand between Lena and the window, but she gripped his arm. "That's a fallen Archon," she said, her voice trembling. "He's far beyond the Retrievers, Please, Jax, don't fight him. He'll kill you. The front door burst open, torn from its hinges by an invisible force. The Archon stepped inside, his robes rippling with celestial energy. Chains of pure light materialized in his hands, writhing like living things. Jax grabbed a nearby chair and swung it with all his strength. The Archon didn't even blink. The chair shattered against some kind of barrier, splinters falling harmlessly to the floor. With a gesture that seemed almost lazy, he sent Jax flying across the room. Jax slammed into the wall hard, enough to crack the plaster, pain exploding through his body as he crumpled to the floor. Please, Lena begged, as the glowing chains wrapped around her wrists. The others who helped me, spare them. They didn't know what I was. The Archon's perfect face showed no emotion. Your sentence was extinction, Celestialara. You were meant to fade from existence entirely when you fell. Your continued presence is an aberration that must be corrected. Jax tried to stand, his vision blurring. Blood trickled down his temple, but he forced himself forward. Let her go, he growled, though each word sent pain through his ribs. She's done nothing wrong. The Archon turned to him, eyes like distant stars. Human, your courage is noted, but this matter is beyond your comprehension. Another casual gesture sent Jax sprawling into the dirt outside, every bone in his body screaming in protest. Jax, Lena cried out, struggling against the burning chains. I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. White gold light began to build around the Archon and his prisoner, so bright it hurt to look at. Jax reached toward them, his fingers grasping empty air as the radiance intensified to blinding levels. When it finally faded, leaving spots dancing in his vision, the yard was empty. Lena was gone. Pain throbbed through every inch of his body as he lay there in the dirt, staring at the space where she had stood. The sun had returned to normal. Birds were singing again, but none of it mattered. His voice came out as barely more than a whisper, rough with determination despite his injuries. I won't let that be the end. Pain pulled Jax back to consciousness, throbbing through every inch of his battered body. The familiar scents of motor oil and leather from the safe house mixed with something else, freshly baked cookies and lavender perfume. His eyes fluttered open to find Widow May Henderson perched on a chair beside him, her weathered hands busy with knitting needles that clicked softly in the dim room. Welcome back, dear, she said without looking up from her work. You've been out for about 4 hours. Jax tried to sit up, but fell back with a groan as his ribs protested. 2 of his biker brothers, Tank and Bear, stepped closer from where they'd been keeping watch by the door. Easy there, boss, Tank said, his usually gruff voice gentle. Doc says nothing's broken, but you're going to be feeling it for a while. How? Jax's throat felt raw. How did May get here? Bear handed him a glass of water. Called her after we found you in the yard. Figured you could use her kind of medicine more than the regular sort right now. May set her knitting aside and leaned forward, her gray eyes full of understanding. The boys told me what happened, or at least what they saw of it. That poor girl being taken by something they couldn't quite explain. She patted Jax's hand. But you saw it all, didn't you? Jax closed his eyes. The memory of Lena vanishing, in that burst of cold light sending fresh pain through his chest that had nothing to do with his injuries. They took her. I wasn't strong enough to stop them. Strength comes in many forms, Jax Maddox, May said softly. And love, real, deep love like what I see in your eyes when you speak of her. That kind of love never truly disappears. It echoes beyond this world, beyond any boundaries we can see. The words stirred something in Jax's memory, Lena explaining how humans sometimes touched the celestial realm through pure emotions, through acts of compassion and love. He'd scoffed then, his cynical nature refusing to accept such a simple truth. But now, "I need to sit up," he said, gritting his teeth through the pain as Tank and Bear helped him upright. His head spun for a moment, but he forced himself to focus. "May, remember last month when you gave me that old photo album to look through?" She nodded. "The one with pictures of my Harold and me in our younger days. You said something about how real love shows in people's eyes. I need it, and..." He looked at his biker brothers. "Remember that box of stuff from when we helped that homeless veteran get back on his feet? The thank you letter he wrote us?" "Sure, boss. It's at the clubhouse with the other mementos," Bear said, though confusion showed on his face. "Get it for me. And any other tokens like that? Things that remind us of times we helped people, showed kindness." Jax's voice grew stronger with each word. "Lena told me humans can't physically reach heaven, but we can touch it through love and compassion, through choosing to be better than what the world expects of us." Understanding dawned in May's eyes. "You mean to find a way to her? They said she wasn't supposed to exist anymore, that she was meant to fade away completely." Jax's hands clenched into fists. "But she did exist. She does exist. I felt her heart, saw her soul in every kind thing she did. And if love echoes beyond this world like you said..." Tank and Bear exchanged glances, then nodded firmly. "We'll get what you need, boss," Tank said. "Whatever it takes." As his brothers headed out, May reached into her large purse and pulled out a familiar tin of cookies. "These were always her favorite when she'd stop by my house after cleaning yours. She'd sit and listen to my old stories for hours, looking at everything like it was precious beyond words." Jax took the tin with trembling hands, remembering how Lena's face had lit up at simple things: bacon sizzling in a pan, children laughing in a park, an old couple holding hands. She'd seen the beauty in humanity that he'd forgotten how to see. Through the next hours, as the sun began to set and rise again, his brothers brought item after item: photographs, letters, small tokens of gratitude from people whose lives they'd touched. May helped him arrange them in a circle around the couch where he sat, each object carrying its own weight of memory and meaning. Here was the stuffed bear they'd bought for a crying little girl when her mother couldn't afford Christmas presents. There was the American flag the veteran had insisted they keep after they'd helped him find housing. A stack of thank you cards from the women's shelter, where they did free motorcycle maintenance. Photos of community barbecues, toy drives, funeral escorts for fallen soldiers. "I always claimed I believed in nothing," Jax said softly as dawn began to paint the sky outside. "Told myself the world was cold and meaningless, but I was wrong." He picked up the cookie tin, holding it close to his heart. "I believe in her goodness, in everything she showed me about what humanity can be." May squeezed his shoulder gently. "Then let that belief guide you, dear. Let your heart show you the way." Jax settled back against the couch, surrounded by the physical reminders of compassion and kindness. His body still ached, but his spirit felt stronger than ever. As the first rays of sunrise streamed through the window, he closed his eyes and whispered a single word: "Lena." The warmth started in Jax's chest, right where his heart beat steadily against his ribs. At first he thought it was just emotion, the overwhelming feelings of love and determination as he focused on Lena. But then the warmth grew, spreading through his body like gentle sunlight. He heard May gasp somewhere distant, as if through water. "Jax, you're glowing." The physical world began to blur around him, the safe house walls and collected mementos becoming translucent, then transparent. The glow intensified until everything dissolved into pure light. When his vision cleared, Jax found himself standing in a landscape unlike anything he'd ever seen. The ground beneath his boots wasn't quite solid, shifting between pearl-white clouds and crystalline paths. Pillars of light stretched endlessly upward, and streams of pure energy flowed through the air like rivers. The entire realm seemed to pulse with life and power, existing somewhere between thought and reality. "Lena," his voice echoed strangely in the ethereal space, "I'm coming for you." As he moved forward, following an instinct he couldn't explain, figures emerged from the light. They appeared almost human, but their forms shimmered and changed, crowned with halos of pure energy. Lesser celestial beings, watching him with expressions of shock and curiosity. "A mortal?" one whispered, its voice chiming like bells. "Here? Impossible." Another drifted closer, studying him. "How did you breach the veil between realms?" "Love," Jax said simply, continuing to walk. "Now get out of my way." "You cannot proceed," a third being declared, materializing directly in his path. "This realm is not for human feet." Jax didn't break stride. "Watch me." The celestial raised its hand, summoning a wall of light. Jax walked straight through it, the barrier dissolving where his determination met it. The beings murmured in astonishment as the glow around him intensified. His path led him through trials that seemed designed to turn him back. A chasm of swirling darkness tested his courage. He crossed without hesitation, thinking of Lena's bravery. A garden of perfect peace offered him eternal contentment if he'd abandon his quest. He refused, knowing no paradise would be complete without her. A mirror showed him his own darkness, his past mistakes and failures. He acknowledged them, but wouldn't let them define him, just as Lena had seen past his rough exterior to his true heart. Each challenge he faced dissolved before the pure, unwavering strength of his love and loyalty. The celestial beings watching him began to whisper different words. Extraordinary. Unprecedented. Perhaps. Finally, he reached what appeared to be a vast courtroom made of light and shadow. There, chained with bonds of pure energy, stood Lena. Her form flickered between human and celestial, growing fainter by the moment. The sight of her fading away sent a spike of pain through his heart, sharper than any physical wound. Above her loomed the fallen Archon, his presence filling the space with cold authority. Other celestial judges lined the walls, their faces impassive as they watched the proceedings. The Archon's eyes fixed on Jax with dangerous intensity. "How dare a mortal intrude upon celestial judgment?" The Archon's voice resonated with power that should have driven Jax to his knees, but he remained standing, strengthened by everything that had led him here. "Jax, no," Lena whispered, her voice weak but still carrying that gentle concern for others that had first touched his heart. "Please go. Don't let them take you too." Instead, Jax walked forward until he stood between her and the Archon. Every step felt like pushing against a hurricane, but he wouldn't be moved. His love for Lena, his belief in her goodness, burned brighter than any celestial light. Looking directly into the Archon's ancient eyes, Jax spoke words that would forever change both realms. "You want judgment? Start with me." The celestial chamber hummed with tension as Jax stood before the tribunal. His heart pounded, but his voice remained steady, carrying the weight of every moment he'd shared with Lena. "You call compassion a crime?" he challenged, his words echoing through the luminous space. "I've seen what Lena brings to our world. She notices the forgotten ones. The old widow who needs help with groceries, the kid with scraped knees nobody stops for. She makes people feel seen." The Archon's face darkened. She violated sacred law. Then your laws are wrong. Jax's voice cracked with emotion. You sit up here in your perfect realm, judging what you don't understand. Down there, people are hurting. They're lonely, they're scared, and still they choose to help each other. They choose love. Energy rippled through the chamber as he spoke. The chains binding Lena flickered, their light wavering. I was nobody, Jax continued, his eyes burning with unshed tears. Just another tough guy on a motorcycle, thinking the whole world was dark. Then Lena showed me different. She taught me that hope isn't weak. It's the bravest thing we've got. The lesser celestials along the walls stirred, whispering among themselves. Lena's eyes widened as her chains dimmed further. Silence! The Archon's command boomed. You cannot comprehend the order we maintain. Order? Jax laughed, a sound full of pain and understanding. I've seen order. It's cold, empty. But I've also seen a fallen angel sweep my garage floor just to make an old man's day better. Tell me which one matters more. As he spoke, Lena began to glow brighter. The love in his words, the pure belief in her worth, sparked something deep within her celestial essence. Humans are flawed, Jax acknowledged, his voice softening. We mess up, we fall, but we get back up. We try again. And sometimes, when we're lucky, we learn to love bigger than our own pain. The chains around Lena shuddered. She stood straighter, strength returning to her dimmed form. You want to judge something? Jax spread his arms wide. Judge the way she makes the world better just by being in it. Judge how many lives she's touched. Judge how one person's kindness can change everything. Suddenly, a surge of pure light erupted from Lena. The chains shattered, dissolving into sparkles of energy that drifted away like stardust. She transformed before their eyes, not into a weapon of celestial might, but into something new. Her form shimmered with gentle radiance, wings of hope and protection unfurling behind her. The Archon stepped back, recognition dawning in his ancient eyes. The prophecy. When mortal love rewrites celestial law. Lena moved forward, her steps leaving trails of light until she stood beside Jax. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwining. Where they touched, their energies merged, his earthly strength, her celestial grace. We forgot, one of the tribunal members whispered. We forgot what we were meant to guard. Not order, another agreed. Love itself. Light flooded the chamber, warm and alive, so different from the cold radiance that had filled it before. One by one, the tribunal members bowed their heads. Even the Archon lowered his gaze, acknowledging a truth written in laws older than judgment, that love, freely given, could transform both heaven and earth. Lena squeezed Jax's hand, her voice full of wonder. You came for me. Always will, he answered simply. Around them, the celestial realm pulsed with new understanding. Heaven had judged humanity and found itself learning instead, learning about the strength of compassion, the power of hope, and the endless capacity of the human heart to rise above its own limitations through love. A soft flash of warm light enveloped them, and suddenly the celestial chamber dissolved. The familiar scents of coffee and grilled burgers replaced the ethereal atmosphere as Jax and Lena found themselves standing outside the small diner where their story had begun. The evening sky stretched above them, painted in shades of purple and orange, mirroring that fateful night when everything changed. Jax blinked, adjusting to the return to the mortal world. His leather jacket felt real and solid against his skin, grounding him after the otherworldly experience. He turned to look at Lena, worried for a moment that she might have changed or disappeared. But there she stood, more beautiful than ever. To anyone else passing by, she appeared fully human, a lovely young woman in a simple dress. But Jax could see more. A subtle luminescence seemed to dance around her, visible only to his eyes, like sunlight playing through crystal. It was a reminder of what they'd been through, of who she truly was. "Shall we go in?" Lena asked, her voice carrying that same gentleness that had first caught his attention. "I think we deserve a proper meal this time." Jax couldn't help but smile. "No mysterious men in black suits to interrupt us?" "Not anymore," she assured him, taking his hand. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The diner looked exactly as it had before. Red vinyl booths, chrome fixtures gleaming under fluorescent lights, the soft clatter of plates and murmured conversations creating a comfortable atmosphere. They slid into the same booth they'd occupied on their first date. Martha, the older waitress with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, recognized them immediately. "Well, look who's back. I was worried when you two ran out so suddenly last time." She pulled out her notepad, then paused, studying their faces. "Something's different about you both." Lena smiled warmly. "Life has a way of changing people." "That it does, honey." Martha nodded knowingly. "I'll bring you some coffee to start." Once they were alone, Lena reached across the table and took both of Jax's hands in hers. Her touch carried that familiar warmth, but now it felt more present, more connected to the earthly plane. "I need to explain something," she said softly, "about why I'm still here and what happens next." Jax squeezed her hands gently. "I'm listening." "When we stood before the tribunal, I was given a choice." Her eyes met his, full of emotion. "I could return to my celestial form, restored to my former position, or I could stay here, on Earth, as a guardian of compassion, a protector of the very thing I was once punished for sharing too freely." Martha returned with their coffee, pausing as she set down the mugs. "My word, I've never seen two people look at each other quite like you do. It's like watching a miracle unfold right here in my diner." They thanked her, and once she moved away, Lena continued. "I chose Earth, Jax. I chose this life, this form. I'm still connected to celestial energy. You can see it, can't you? But I'm human now, in all the ways that matter most." "And you're okay with that?" Jax asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Giving up heaven?" A soft laugh escaped her lips. "Heaven isn't just a place above us. It's in the moments we create, the kindness we share. And you, Jax," she squeezed his hands tighter, "you showed them that. You showed them that human love could be more powerful than celestial law." "So what does being a guardian of compassion mean?" "It means we work together," she explained, her eyes bright with purpose. "You're part of this too now. Through your actions, your courage, your love, you've become my partner in this mission. We'll help others find hope, protect those who need it, guide people toward their own capacity for kindness." Their food arrived, cheeseburgers and fries, simple diner fare that somehow tasted better than any celestial feast could have. They ate quietly, comfortable in each other's presence, occasionally sharing soft looks that spoke volumes. As the evening drew to a close, they paid their bill and stepped out into the cool night air. The street lamps cast warm pools of light on the sidewalk, and somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle rumbled past. Lena turned to face Jax, her expression tender and amused. "Do you remember?" she asked. "That day in your garage when you asked me out as a joke?" Jax rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "Not my finest moment." She stepped closer, placing her hand against his cheek. "I knew, you know. I could sense your surprise when I said yes, but something in me recognized something in you, even then." Her voice dropped to a whisper, full of emotion. "Loving you is the greatest truth of my life." Jax's heart swelled with feelings he once would have denied. He pulled her close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Together they began walking down the quiet street, their joined shadows stretching behind them. Above, the night sky seemed to glow a little brighter than usual, as if heaven itself was offering its blessing. Stars twinkled with extra warmth, and the moon cast a gentle path before them as they walked toward their shared future, not as angel and mortal, but as partners in a mission of hope and love. Martha watched them through the diner window, smiling to herself as she wiped down the counter. Something about their love made the whole world feel a little more magical, a little more full of possibility. And perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all, how love between two souls could transform not just themselves, but everything around them. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.